The sound of laughter still echoed in my mind as I pulled into my driveway that warm spring afternoon. For weeks, I had been away visiting my sister who had just gone through a difficult surgery. And helping her through recovery gave me strength. I didn't realize I still had. I was exhausted, yes, but hopeful. All I wanted was to step out of the car, breathe in the scent of my roses, and let the garden I'd poured my soul into welcome me home. My garden was more than flowers and dirt was healing. It was family. It was the memory of my late husband who used to kneel beside me planting tomatoes while humming an old tune. Every petal, every leaf carried a story. But as I opened the door and stepped out, my smile collapsed. My garden was gone. At first, my mind couldn't process what I was seeing. The beds I had tended for years were nothing but bare patches of soil. The tulips that had bloomed faithfully each spring, gone. The herbs I had planted by hand, gone. The small fountain where birds once gathered lay tipped on its side like trash. It felt like someone had ripped the heart out of my home. I staggered forward, clutching my chest as if the air itself had turned heavy, choking me. My hands shook as I reached down into the soil, still fresh with cuts where roots had been pulled. The earth still remembered what once grew there, even if the world now looked barren. And then I saw the notice pinned to my door, in bold letters, stamped with the seal of the HOA, unauthorized landscaping removal. Property adjusted to conform with HOA standards. Costs billed to homeowner. My legs went weak. My garden hadn't been destroyed by accident. It hadn't been the work of nature or time. No, this was deliberate. HOA Karen, the president of TADE, our neighborhood's so-called association, had decided my garden didn't fit the aesthetic of her perfect community. She had called a crew, ripped it all out, and then dared to charge me for it. Tears blurred my eyes as I sank down on the porch steps. The paper crumpled in my fist. My mind swirled between grief and rage. That garden was where I had planted a rosebush on what would have been my husband's 60th birthday. It was where my daughter had knelt as a child, helping me place marigolds in neat little rows. It was where I sat every evening with a cup of tea, watching the sun fall behind the trees while I whispered my prayers. And now, all of it was gone because Karen wanted uniformity. Because she wanted power. Because in her eyes, beauty that didn't match her rules had no place here. When my daughter Hannah arrived later that evening, she found me still sitting there, staring at the barren land like it was a grave. She dropped her bags, rushed to me, and pulled me into her arms. "Mom, what happened?" she asked, voice trembling. I couldn't even answer at first. I just handed her the notice, and the moment she read it, fury lit up her face. Hannah had always been the fire to my calm, the strength to my gentleness. She stormed into the house and dialed Karen's number before I could stop her. Karen's voice carried through the speaker, cold and smug. "Yes, I approved the removal. Your mother's garden was not in line with HOA guidelines. She should thank us, it raised property values. I'd never heard my daughter scream like that before. You destroyed her memories. You destroyed my father's legacy. Do you have any idea what you've done? Okay?" But Karen only chuckled and replied, "If she wants to complain, she can bring it to the next board meeting." Then the line went dead. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the backyard under the moonlight. The silence deafening without the soft rustle of leaves and the sweet fragrance of blossoms. My heart ached, and for a moment, I thought about giving up, letting Karen win. After all, what could one grieving widow do against a whole HOA board? But as I stood there, I remembered the words my husband once told me when life felt unbearable. Don't let anyone take your ground. You've built it with your hands. You guard it with your heart. And something inside me hardened. The next morning, I started making calls. I spoke to neighbors. Some whispered their support. Others looked away, too afraid of Karen's wrath. I dug through HOA bylaws, late into the night, trying to find where she had overstepped. And then, buried in the dense legal language, I saw it. She hadn't just acted cruelly, she had acted illegally. No HOA had the right to remove personal property without due process. And what Karen didn't know was that I wasn't alone anymore. I had Hannah, I had my sister's attorney. And I had every memory Karen had tried to rip away, fueling me like fire in my veins. Days turned into weeks as I prepared. I documented everything: the flowers, the removal crew, the receipts I had kept from every purchase at the nursery. I gathered photos of the garden through the years, showing how it wasn't an eyesore, but a sanctuary. And each time I felt myself falter, I looked at that bare soil and remembered the laughter, the birthdays, the evenings in prayer. I wasn't just fighting for a garden. I was fighting for dignity, for family, for every neighbor who had been bullied into silence. And then, one morning, it came: the first sign that justice was on my side. A thick envelope arrived in the mail, stamped with the seal of the State Housing Department. My hands shook as I opened it, scanning the words until tears of relief filled my eyes. Karen wasn't untouchable anymore. She had violated state property laws. A fine was being processed. And suddenly, I knew this was only the beginning. The sound of the morning birds should have been a comfort that day. But all I felt was emptiness as I stared at the patch of bare dirt where my garden used to bloom. Every flower, every herb, every vine I had carefully nurtured was gone, replaced with nothing but mud and tire tracks. It felt like someone had ripped the heartbeat right out of my land. The worst part? My wife's face. She stood beside me, clutching her cardigan close, as if the sight had made her colder than the morning air itself. Tears rimmed her eyes, though she refused to let them fall. That garden wasn't just mine, it was ours. It had been her therapy after her mother's passing, her sanctuary when days were heavy. And now, in one arrogant sweep, Karen and her HOA board had destroyed it. I felt my chest tighten, anger simmering beneath my skin. "She thinks she owns this land," I muttered, pacing as I rubbed my temples. My wife placed a hand on my arm, grounding me, though I could feel her fingers trembling. "We'll fix it," she whispered, but even her voice carried doubt. She had seen too many of Karen's tricks, too many neighbors bullied into silence. And that was the problem. Karen thrived on fear. She thrived on making people believe they had no choice but to obey her demands. But not me. Not this time. Later that morning, I called the HOA office. The secretary answered, her voice sickly sweet, though it cracked the moment I asked about the removal. "Mr. Parker," she said, "the board decided your garden was a violation. It was unapproved landscaping." Our tone was dismissive, almost rehearsed. I could hear the shuffle of papers in the background, as if she was already moving on to the next case. My grip on the phone tightened. "That garden was on my property," I snapped, my voice sharp enough to make her falter. "No one gave you permission. You trespassed." There was silence before she cleared her throat. "Karen, I mean." The president made the final call. And just like that, she hung up. The rage inside me boiled over. Karen thought she could bulldoze over me the same way she bulldozed through every neighbor she ever cornered. She thought she could intimidate me into backing down, just like she had with a couple across the street when they dared to paint their shutters red instead of beige, or with the widowed veteran who built a small shed for his tools, only two. Have Karen demand it be torn down? I remembered the look on that man's face when he sold his home just months later, beaten by the constant harassment. Not me. Not anymore. That evening, I walked the empty stretch of dirt that used to hold our vegetables, my boots sinking into the soft earth. My wife joined me, holding a cup of tea in her hands like it was the only thing keeping her steady. "Do you think we can ever get it back?" she asked softly. I turned to her, meeting her weary eyes. "We'll get more than that," I said firmly. She took something from us, but I'll make sure she pays for every single root she destroyed. It wasn't an empty promise. It was a vow. The first thing I did was pull out every document I had on my property survey maps, deed papers. Everything. My land was my land. The HOA had no authority over the specific section where my garden stood. As I combed through the paperwork, my anger turned into something sharper, something more dangerous: determination. And when I found the clause in the county's land use laws that clearly stated HOAs could not alter private property without due process or owner consent, I nearly laughed. They had broken the law. The next morning, I drove to the county office, armed with photos of the destruction and the legal documents in hand. The clerk who helped me was shocked at the extent of the damage. "They actually went onto your property and did this?" she asked, her brows furrowed. "Yes," I said flatly. "Without notice, without consent, without a single shred of authority." She leaned back, shaking her head. "That's not just a violation of HOA bylaws, it's a state violation." For the first time since I'd seen the destroyed garden, a flicker of hope sparked in me. The wheels of justice were slow, but they were moving, and I was about to grease them with every ounce of proof I had. When I got home, Karen was waiting. She was standing on the sidewalk, her arms crossed, her eyes smug, as though she expected me to come crawling to her for mercy. "You're welcome," she said with a smirk. "Your little weed patch was bringing down property values. Now your yard looks clean like the rest of us." I stared at her, my jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. "You trespassed," I said, my voice low but deadly. "And you destroyed something that didn't belong to you. I hope you're ready to answer for it." Her smile wavered, just slightly, but she quickly recovered. "The HOA has authority over this community. My decision is final." Step closer, closing the space between us until she had to tilt her chin up to look at me. "No, Karen," I whispered. "The state has authority, and you're about to learn what that means." For the first time, I saw the flicker of doubt in her eyes, a crack in the armor she wore so proudly. She tried to mask it, but her voice trembled as she muttered something about rules before storming off down the sidewalk. I watched her go, my heart pounding. This was more than just revenge now. This was justice for me, for my wife, for every neighbor she had tormented. And when that envelope would arrive in her mailbox, with the weight of the state behind it, I knew it would freeze her in place. Because Karen had taken my garden, but I was about to take her power. The morning after receiving the HOA's letter, I couldn't sleep. I had been up most of the night, pacing the living room, staring at the empty patch where my garden used to bloom outside the window. My hands kept shaking as if I had lost a family member. I didn't know how to explain it to anyone who hadn't seen that garden. It wasn't just vegetables and flowers. It was where my children used to help me water the plants, where my late husband had planted the first rose bush on our anniversary, and where I found peace after long days. That Karen didn't just rip out plants, she ripped out memories. Now she dared to send me a notice telling me I was in violation for unauthorized landscaping. It was like being stabbed after already being cut open. My daughter Emily called me that morning, and the moment I heard her voice, I broke. "Mom, what's wrong?" she asked. I didn't want to burden her, but the dam broke, and I sobbed. Telling her about the garden, about how the woman from the HOA had it all removed while I was away, about the notice. She was silent at first. Then I could hear her sniffle on the other end. "Mom, Dad would have hated this. That garden meant everything to him. To us." Her voice trembled with anger. "You can't let them get away with this. Promise me you'll fight back." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Emily was right. This wasn't just about dirt and flowers anymore. It was about my family's dignity. Later that day, I walked to the HOA office. My heart thudded in my chest like a drum. Karen, the president of the HOA, sat smugly behind the counter, her pearl necklace gleaming under the fluorescent lights. She didn't even look surprised to see me. Instead, she gave me that plastic smile, the kind that makes your skin crawl. "Ah, Mrs. Turner," she said sweetly, "I assume you're here about the notice. Don't worry, if you just agree to remove any unauthorized plants going forward, we can forget the fine." My blood boiled. Unauthorized. She had destroyed my garden without my permission, and now she was talking as though I was the one at fault. My voice shook, but I forced myself to speak. "You had no right to touch my property. That garden was mine. You violated my home." She laughed softly, a sound like glass breaking. "Your garden violated community standards. I simply enforced the rules. It's nothing personal, nothing personal." The words echoed in my head as I left the office, fists clenched. To her, my life, my memories, my late husband's rosette was nothing personal. Just rules. That's when the switch flipped inside me. I wasn't going to sit quietly anymore. They had taken something irreplaceable from me, and I would make sure they answered for it. That evening, I sat with a pile of documents spread across my dining table. I dug through every HOA bylaw, every rulebook, every clause. And then I found it that HOA could not legally alter or remove anything from private property without explicit homeowner consent, unless it posed a direct hazard. My garden posed no hazard. In fact, the bylaws specifically protected homeowner landscaping rights unless there was written approval to enforce changes. My hands trembled as I read it again. They had broken their own rules. And Karen was the one who had signed the order. Suddenly, I wasn't just heartbroken, I was armed. I gathered photos of my garden, receipts of the seeds and flowers I'd bought, and even old family pictures of us tending it together. Each photo felt like a weapon in my hand, proof that what they had destroyed was real, valuable, and mine. But I didn't stop there. I began reaching out to neighbors, gently asking if they'd ever had issues with the HOA. What I learned made my stomach churn. Families fined 4 swing sets in their backyards. An elderly man threatened over the color of his shutters. A widow charged hundreds for having a bird feeder. Karen had built her little empire on bullying people into compliance, and everyone was too scared to fight back until now. Word spread fast. One by one, neighbors started calling me, sharing their stories, their pain. It was like a wound opening across the whole neighborhood. For years, people had suffered in silence, and I had too. But the moment I shared what Karen had done to my garden, something changed. They were angry, and they were ready to see her fall, and I was ready to lead that charge. The next morning, I drafted a formal complaint to the State Housing Authority. My hands were steady this time, each word I typed carrying the weight of justice. I outlined every detail: the illegal removal of my garden, the violation of HOA bylaws, the harassment of other residents. I attached all the evidence, photos, receipts, testimonies from neighbors. When I hit send, it felt like lighting a match in a dry forest. Something big was about to burn. Days passed, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sense of hope. My neighbors checked in on me, bringing meals, sharing encouragement. We weren't just individuals anymore. We were united. The garden might have been gone, but in its place, something else was growing: resistance. Karen had underestimated me, underestimated all of us. She thought she could tear out flowers and erase a legacy with one order. But what she really did was awaken a storm she couldn't control. Then, one quiet afternoon, I heard the sound I'd been waiting for: the creak of the mailbox outside. I opened it with shaking hands and pulled out a letter stamped with the state's seal. My heart pounded as I read the words. The HOA had been found in violation. Not only that, but the state had issued a substantial fine for unlawful property interference, and the order was signed directly against Karen as president. My knees nearly gave out, and tears blurred my vision. After all the pain, all the loss, here was proof that what they did was wrong, that justice was real. Karen was finally going to face consequences. But as I stood there holding that letter, I knew this was only the beginning. The fine was just the first blow. Karen had tried to break me by destroying my garden. Instead, she had made me stronger. And now, it was time to make sure she never had the power to hurt another family again. The week dragged by slower than ever. Each day, I would glance out the kitchen window, and where my roses once swayed, there was nothing but raw dirt. It wasn't just a garden that had been destroyed. It was a graveyard of memories, of Sundays with my mother, of quiet evenings where my daughter and I sat laughing, picking ripe tomatoes and sharing them fresh. It felt like they had stolen not just flowers, but pieces of me. And yet, under the ache, a fire burned. The state official had promised results soon. And I clung to that like a lifeline. My daughter tried to cheer me up, sneaking in with grocery store flowers, placing them in vases around the house. "It's not the same," she whispered, "but at least the house can smell like you again." Those words nearly broke me. She was trying to fill the hole Karen had carved out of my life. I hugged her tight, silently vowing that Karen was going to pay for every drop of hurt she caused. That evening, while we were cleaning up after dinner, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find my neighbor, Tom, standing with his cap in hand. His face was red with anger. "I heard what she did," he muttered. "Karen bragged at the HOA meeting last night. Said she cleaned up the neighborhood by tearing out your so-called weeds." Weeds? My voice cracked. Those were roses my mother planted, hydrangeas from my grandmother's cuttings. That was my life out there. Tom nodded grimly. "I know. But don't you worry, some of us aren't standing for it. I've lived here 30 years. I've never seen anyone abused by the HOA like this. You're not alone." That was the first time I felt a flicker of hope. The neighbors were watching, and the tide was turning. Maybe Karen thought she could bully me in silence, but the truth was louder than her smug little speeches. The following afternoon, a letter slid into my mailbox. I ripped it open with shaking hands, praying it wasn't another violation notice from the HOA. Instead, it was from the State Housing Board. My heart pounded as I read the words, "Preliminary findings. Suggest unlawful action by HOA representatives. Pending further review, fines may be issued." I sat down hard on the porch steps, the weight of relief washing over me. For the first time in weeks, I laughed. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but it was proof that Karen wasn't untouchable. Proof that the state saw what she had done and wasn't going to let her skate free. 2 days later, it happened. A black sedan pulled up in front of Karen's house. 2 officials stepped out carrying clipboards and cameras. My daughter and I watched from our window as they walked straight up to Karen's porch. Karen came out, all fake smiles and sugary charm, waving her hands like she owned the world. But that smile cracked when they handed her an envelope. Her face went pale. She snatched it open, scanned the first few lines, and I swear I could hear her gasp from across the street. My phone buzzed seconds later, a notification from the state site. The HOA, and specifically Karen as acting president, had been slapped with a massive fine for illegal destruction of private property. Okay, thousands of dollars. I couldn't stop grinning. "She deserves every cent," my daughter whispered. Beside me, her eyes glowing with the same satisfaction burning in my chest. Karen, however, didn't take it quietly. She stormed down her driveway, screaming at the officials, pointing across the street at my house like I was the villain. "She's exaggerating. It wasn't even legal in the first place." That garden was against HOA rules. But the officials didn't even flinch. One calmly replied, "State law supersedes HOA bylaws. You violated state law." And then, as if to drive the nail deeper, they added, "And this will remain on record." Karen froze, her lips trembling, eyes darting between them and me. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her. For once, the mighty Karen had no words. The neighborhood was buzzing by evening. Tom came over again, this time smiling. "The whole street saw it," he said. The queen of the HOA finally knocked off her throne. But as sweet as the moment was, I knew it wasn't over. People like Karen don't just take their punishment and learn. They dig in. They look for new ways to twist the knife. And true enough, the next morning, another letter from the HOA appeared in my box, a fine against me. Unkempt yard, it said. My yard, which she herself had destroyed. I laughed bitterly, slamming the paper on the counter. She won't stop until I'm ruined. My daughter's eyes darkened. Then it's time to stop her first. She was right. If Karen wanted a war, then she had picked the wrong enemy this time. I wasn't the timid neighbor she thought she could walk over. I was a mother, a daughter, a fighter with roots deeper than any HOA rulebook. And I had the law on my side. That night, I drafted my next move. The morning after the officer's visit, I woke up to the sound of my daughter's laughter echoing through the kitchen. She was baking muffins, her flour-dusted hands waving at me when I walked in. For a second, life felt normal again. But the second I saw the barren patch of earth where my garden had once lived, the pain came rushing back like an open wound. That empty spot was more than dirt. It was a reminder of everything HOA Karen had stolen. My peace, my hard work, my joy. And though the officer had warned her, I knew Karen wouldn't stop until she got what she wanted. People like her never stopped. The day rolled on quietly until I went to check the mail. My hands trembled as I pulled a thick envelope from the box, the state seal stamped across the front. I tore it open, unsure if it was something about my appeal or just another formality. But when I read the first line, my heart leaped. Oh, notice. A violation, unauthorized destruction of property. The letter was addressed not to me, but to the HOA, specifically naming Karen as the responsible officer. It detailed how the state environmental agency had received my complaint and, after investigation, determined that the removal of my certified pollinator garden violated state preservation laws. It's a fine, $25,000, payable immediately. I could almost hear her scream when she opened that letter. The thought made me laugh, a bitter kind of laugh that tasted like justice. For weeks, she had stood on her high horse, acting like she was untouchable. But now, reality had knocked on her front door, and it wasn't leaving politely. Later that day, I was on my porch, sipping coffee, when I heard Karen's voice pierce the neighborhood like a rusty knife. She was marching toward my property, the letter clutched in her hand. "Did you do this?" she shrieked, waving the paper as if it were some death sentence. Her face was red, her voice trembling between rage and fear. I didn't stand. I didn't even flinch. I just met her eyes and said softly, "Actions have consequences." She sputtered, trying to find words, but all that came out were fragments. Of blame, you're ruining this neighborhood. You think this makes you safe? We'll fight this fine. We'll take it to court. But even as she said it, I could see the cracks forming in her confidence. The HOA board was already stretched thin. Most of the members hated the drama she stirred up, and now with a $25,000 fine hanging over their heads, her Queen Bee Act was beginning to sour. The next week was pure chaos in the neighborhood. I didn't even need to attend the HOA meeting to know what was happening. Word spread fast. Neighbors whispered in driveways, Complaints surfaced in the community Facebook group. And by midweek, I heard one board member had resigned outright, citing Karen's reckless leadership. Another neighbor, Mr. Alvarez, stopped by to tell me the board had held an emergency session. "They're turning on her," he said with a grin, almost conspiratorial. "They don't want to pay her mess out of their own pockets." And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a strange calm settle in me. The tide was turning, but Karen wasn't about to go quietly. A few days later, she stormed into my yard again, this time at night, flashlight in hand. My daughter saw the glow from her bedroom window and called me in a panic. I ran outside, only to find Karen crouched in the dirt where my garden had been, muttering under her breath, like if she could erase the fine by proving something. She spun around when she heard me, her eyes wide and wild. "You think you've won?" she spat. "This isn't over. I'll make sure you regret ever planting that stupid garden." I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I just pulled out my phone and started recording. Her face went pale as the beam of the flashlight exposed her trespassing. "Go home, Karen," I said evenly. "Before you add breaking and entering to your list of crimes," she stammered, cursed, then bolted back to her house, slamming the door so hard I felt it from across the street. By morning, the whole neighborhood had seen the video. My daughter uploaded it to the community group, and it spread like wildfire. People who had once avoided taking sides suddenly spoke up, condemning her behavior. "She's unfit to lead the HOA," one comment read. Another said, "We've let her bully us long enough." For the first time, I wasn't standing alone. But with support came a new kind of weight. The board scheduled a vote of no confidence, and Karen, desperate to hold on to her crown, went door to door begging for backing. She spun lies about me, about my family, even about the garden, claiming it was a public safety hazard. Yet the more she begged, the more people turned away. I watched from my porch as one family after another closed their doors on her. The woman who once strutted with power now looked like a beggar in her own kingdom. And though I should have felt pity, I didn't. Not after what she'd done. She had stripped my land bare, ripped away my peace, and tried to break my spirit. What she was facing now wasn't cruelty. It was balance. Still, I knew this was only the beginning. The fine was just a scratch. The real storm hadn't hit her. Yet, and when it did, it would take everything she'd ever built. The first court date came on a rainy Monday morning, the kind of weather that made everything feel heavier than it already was. I wore a simple black suit, the same one I had worn at my father's funeral years before, because it carried strength for me. My hands trembled as I held the folder of evidence photos of my destroyed garden. Receipts for the seeds, the state fine letter, and copies of the HOA's bylaws. On the other side of the courtroom, Karen sat upright with her lawyer, her expression smug and her eyes darting toward me like I was nothing more than a nuisance. Behind her, a few other HOA members whispered among themselves, clearly hoping. To see me humiliated, when the judge entered, the room fell silent, and my heart pounded in my chest so hard I thought everyone could hear it. The proceedings began with Karen's lawyer making bold claims that I had violated community standards with my garden, and that Karen had simply protected property values. He spoke as if my garden was some criminal act, painting it like an eyesore, something dangerous. I wanted to shout at him, but my lawyer and old family friend, who agreed to take my case at a discount, squeezed my arm gently, reminding me to stay calm. When it was my turn, I rose slowly, walked to the front, and handed over the photos of my garden lush, colorful, alive. "This was my backyard before Karen tore it apart," I said, my voice shaking but growing stronger as I spoke. This wasn't just a garden, it was therapy. It was my connection to my father, who taught me to plant with my own hands. It was where my children found joy, where we healed from grief. And it was destroyed without permission, without cause. I saw the judge lean forward, studying the images. He glanced at Karen, who shifted uncomfortably. Then I held up the state fine letter. This is what happens when someone decides to act as if they are above the law. Karen thought she had power over me, but in trying to punish me, she punished herself and the HOA she represents. My lawyer then explained the bylaws clearly, pointing out how nothing in them prohibited gardens, and how Karen had no legal authority to destroy private property. The room felt tense, like everyone was holding their breath. The judge's face revealed nothing, but I could see Karen biting her lip, the smugness gone. For the first time, she looked cornered. That gave me a spark of strength. When the session ended, the judge announced he would need time to review all the evidence and issue a decision in the coming weeks. Relief and exhaustion hit me like a wave. As we left the courtroom, Karen brushed past me, whispering, "You'll regret this. You think you've won, but you'll regret it." Her voice was cold, venomous, but instead of shaking me, it almost made me laugh. She sounded desperate. She wasn't in control anymore, and she knew it. At home, my mother hugged me tightly. "Your father would be proud," she whispered, her voice cracking. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to feel hope not just for me, but for my children, who deserved to see their parent fight for what's right. But the fight wasn't over. The HOA sent letters to my mailbox almost daily, accusing me of being a danger to the community and trying to smear my name. My neighbors, divided, whispered rumors. Some stood by me, others avoided me entirely. It was isolating, but I knew the truth was stronger. The fine Karen had triggered still loomed over her. And I suspected the HOA board was already fracturing because of it. 2 weeks later, another envelope arrived. This one wasn't from the HOA, it was from the court. My hands shook as I tore it open. The words inside made me sit down hard at the kitchen table. The judge had ruled in my favor. Karen had acted illegally. She and the HOA were ordered to pay restitution for the destruction of my garden, as well as cover my legal fees. And the cherry on top, the judge noted the state fine she caused was her responsibility, not mine. Tears blurred my vision as I read the letter again and again. The justice felt surreal, like a weight I had been carrying for months was finally being lifted. My children cheered when I told them, and my mother held my face in her hands, whispering prayers of gratitude. But inside me, a flame burned brighter. This wasn't just about money or compensation. This was about showing Karen that she could no longer walk over people's lives without consequences. A few nights later, I received a call from a neighbor on the HOA board. His voice was low, nervous. "But you should know, Karen's in trouble. The board's turning on her. They're blaming her for the fine, the lawsuit, everything. She's not the queen bee anymore." I thanked him and hung up, sitting in silence. For a long while, for the first time, I realized Karen wasn't just losing her grip on me, she was losing her grip on the entire neighborhood. She thought she ruled. But even as victory wrapped around me, I wasn't satisfied yet. My garden was gone, and no judgment or money could replace the years of growth it represented. I would rebuild, yes. But I also wanted Karen to feel what I had felt: helplessness, loss, shame. And as I thought about what might come next, I knew one thing clearly: my revenge wasn't finished. Not yet. The letter she pulled from the mailbox was the one thing she never thought she'd see. A cold morning breeze blew through the street as Karen stood frozen on her driveway, staring at the envelope in her shaking hands. Her lips moved as her eyes raced across the words, but no sound came out. A state-issued fine notice, not a slap. On the wrist from the HOA, not a petty warning she could wiggle her way out of. This was official, stamped, and terrifying. Thousands of dollars she owed personally, with her name written in bold across the top. For the first time, she wasn't the one in control. From my porch, I could see her pale. She stumbled slightly, gripping the edge of her mailbox for balance. I had waited weeks for this moment-long days of filing complaints, of sending evidence, of enduring whispers from neighbors who once believed Karen was untouchable. I had pushed the matter higher, past the HOA, past the board she ruled with. An iron fist straight into the hands of the state environmental agency. They had seen the proof of my destroyed garden, the evidence of her unauthorized removal, and they hadn't hesitated. Now the system she once wielded like a weapon was turning against her. But this wasn't just about money or a fine. It was about the way her face crumbled as she realized the walls she had built around herself were cracking. For years, she bullied people with letters, fines, and threats. She stole weekends from families with rules about lawns, harassed parents about toys left outside, and humiliated older couples about their fences. Now she was the one humiliated, her power stripped, her name attached to disgrace. She marched up to my property, paper clenched in her fist, anger burning in her eyes. This is your doing. She spat, her voice shaking with rage. I stood tall, calm in a way she never expected. No, Karen, this is your doing. You tore out something that didn't belong to you. And now the state agrees. Her eyes darted around, noticing the neighbors who had gathered silently, pretending to sweep driveways or walk dogs, but really watching the queen fall from her throne. Her face turned red, but her voice cracked with desperation. You don't understand what this will do to me, she whispered. Not to me, but almost to herself. The power she once had was gone, and all that remained was a frightened woman clutching a paper that weighed more than stone. I should have felt pity. Maybe once I would have, but not now. Not after what she had taken from me. Not after watching my kids cry when they saw their garden, the place we grew food and memories, ripped out by her cruelty. The justice wasn't just in the fine. It was in knowing she finally understood what it meant to lose something you loved. The days that followed were a slow unraveling for Karen. The fine grew with penalties. Neighbors distanced themselves. Whispers turned into conversations she couldn't ignore. She wasn't the leader anymore. She was the warning, the story people told with lowered voices. I rebuilt my garden, stronger and brighter than before. Each new sprout a symbol of resilience. And every time I watered those plants, I felt the weight of justice, not bitter, but healing. Revenge, I realized, wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was a quiet letter in the mail, a whisper of the system finally catching up. And as Karen's world crumbled, mine grew again, rooted deeper than ever. The garden thrived, my family healed, and the neighborhood finally understood that even the fiercest tyrant could be brought down. And for Karen, that letter was only the beginning.